Right. Good morning. And yesterday we had stopped at the point where we found out, or we were about to find out the reason behind the enmity between the crows and the owls. And we talked about the complex structure of Panchatantra in the way that there is a mastered narrative of Vishnu Sharma and the three princes. And there are inset narratives of the five tantras, as it were, Mitra Bheda, Mitra Labha, and the text that we are going to read, Kakolukiyam. And we had talked about the broadest narrative in Kakolukiyam, that of the crows and the owls, and how the owls have this pathological enmity towards the crows, and Cloudy's sort of discussions with his ministers about the right course of action to take in view of this enmity. Now, so far, the narrative has been told by Vishnu Sharma. Now the narrative switches to Livestrong, and we'll quickly look at the narratives that Livestrong delivers so that we see what the themes of the texts are. And Livestrong says, I will tell you, and he talks about the birds picking a king. Now, you see, this question of picking a king is also very interesting in the sense that the beast fable, as it were, offers within the structure of the Indian polity this question of who should be the king of the realm. Now, the question of kingship, Raja, was largely determined by birth in the Indian situation. But also, there's this question of what if the king abdicates? And what if there's no heir? Right? So there's this question of the choice of king and who makes a great king. As I pointed out in the last class, Panchatantra is also about the fashioning of the courtier and the king. Who is the good counselor? Who is the good king? What are the choices available to the king? Equally, what are the choices available to the people? So in a certain sense, you can see that the animal world is part or shows a democracy which probably the human world would not have. You know, you did not get to choose a king in the ancient Indian setup. Kingship was determined by birth. But there's a transference almost in the animal kingdom, whereby the birds actually get to nominate who their king is, despite there being Garuda, because Garuda is the king of the birds. And they said, we have in Garuda a king to be sure, but this Garuda is always absent. And therefore, Garuda provides us no security. Now, what is the first thing that the king must provide to his people is the question that is therefore asked. The first question, the first requirement of the king is to provide his people with security, right? So, and there's this other thing that there can be no 2-3 kings in the realm. It's very interesting in the way that within the Indian political setup, therefore, or within the political setup of the Panchatantra, there's no scope for an oligarchy where many people come together to rule. There is only the concept of monarchy, right, where there's one king and who will command absolute suzerainty, as it were. And therefore, who are the people to avoid again? You see, what is happening recurrently in Panchatantra, as many of you have already pointed out, is that the point of entry into the discussion of choice is about the king. But then also it broadens out to the broader society as to who are the people to avoid, for example. Just check that out, that verse which I've projected. These 6 should every man avoid, like leaky ships at sea. Right? A dull professor, right? If you find me dull, then avoid me at all, under all circumstances. A priest without theology, who does not know his theology, his mantras, as it were. A king who does not give defense. That's the most important thing. The primary function of the king is to give defense, and Garuda is always absent. A wife whose tongue can slash. A cowboy hankering for a town, so somebody who's in the village but who wants to be part of the town setup, he's always dissatisfied. And a barber after cash, and therefore they pitch for someone else as a king, and they nominate the owl. And the owl, of course, is very happy to be part of this. He's in all his pomp, and he decides that he's going to sit on the lion throne. But there's this problem with the owl, because the owl is blind during day. Now, many of you will often wonder why the owl becomes a subject, why the crow, because obviously in the Panchatantra, the crow becomes a symbol of shrewdness, just as the jackal is, or the barber is among human beings. Now, in that sense, the owl is seen as the most ferocious of birds, yet the owl is handicapped with one big problem, is that he does not see during the daytime. So he's a night bird, and therefore, his capability to kill is manifold, yet he is handicapped by daytime, therefore he will not make a good ruler. But anyways, this is a description of the coronation, as you can see projected on the screen, and you will find the projections of the animal world in sync with many of the ceremonies in the human world. As I pointed out to you, the animal world is just a front. Through it, the author is looking at the political setup, the social makeup of the contemporary Indian society. And then the crow comes in from nobody knew where, announcing his entrance with a raucous caw. Once again, the crow is manifested by his voice, by his advice, by his language. So, and then the crow is seen by the birds as the shrewdest of birds. And you see, there's this classification of birds and animals and men. Of men, the barber smartest is, the jackal of all the beasts, the crow is cleverest of birds, the white robe of the priests. Right, so the crow has knowledge. The knowledge is a very vital commodity within in the Indian polity at this point of time. And you can see the class hierarchy is very clearly divided, that the king possesses power, martial power, whereas knowledge is possessed by the teacher, and very obviously then, by extension, probably a certain class of people. So we already locate in Panchatantra a kind of a class hierarchy within Indian society. There's just a sidelight, I want to tell you a story. But this story has nothing to do with the Panchatantra, but about the barber. Now, you see, many of you in your younger days have read storybooks about how clever the barber is. This story, incidentally, was told to me by one of our very dear former colleagues, Bikash Chakraborty, who was probably there when Shrewdness was the vice chancellor of Vishwabharati. Shrewdness had this knowing all barber, who used to come and shave him during the day. And Shrewdness and the barber very often used to say that he knew how to read the palm, haat dekhte janto. So Shrewdness once said, he, being a physicist as he was, he said, "You are full of stuff and nonsense, you know nothing. Look at my hand and tell me, look at my palm and tell me what is going to happen to me, because I'm going to hold you accountable." So the barber looked at his hand and said, "Well, you're going to face a difficult time." And then Shrewdness said, "Yes, so?" And pat came the response, "You're going to get used to it." Of course, Shrewdness Bose got a lot of flack as the Vice Chancellor of Vishwabharati and left. But anyways, you see, what I think is important here, and when the Panchatantra talks about knowledge, is it is also talking about intelligence. It's making an interesting discussion. The white-robed priest, who's the Brahmin really, has knowledge from books. But the barber is a quick-witted fellow. The barber possesses cunning and intelligence, common sense. So we are looking at two different orders of intelligence here. One which is gleaned from books, and the other which is gleaned from common sense. And Vishnu Sharma is bringing them together. All the wealth of his learning is putting it into small doses of common sense, intelligence, and wit to adapt oneself to the situation, is what the Panchatantra's fundamental theme is. That human society is always under flux and change, and that the truest and most intelligent human being will forever adjust to these changes and survive. Right. Anyways, I will not linger on that. I could go on and on, but then there's this question that whoever is intelligent, you must listen to him. So there's also this question that knowledge can be, or intelligence can be, with the few, but the common sense is to be heeded from whoever you get. So the bird said to the crow, the birds have no king, and therefore, please express your opinion about the owl. And the crow laughs and says, gentlemen, this is foolish. You have eminent swans, peacocks, beautiful, nightingales who can sing, partridges who are the symbols of peace, pigeons, cranes. Why anoint this ugly-faced fellow who is blind in the daytime? So obviously one of the aspects of the king should be his appearance, and the other is his ability to function during daytime. And the crow also makes the point that the owl is unnecessarily ferocious and violent, ugly, cruel, full of spleen. Spleen is malice. Spleen is an organ of the body, and in earlier medicine, you see, the liver and the spleen were supposed to be the seat of emotions, right? Therefore, the owl is full of malice. Every word he speaks is mean. If you make the owl your king, he will fail in everything. Now, once again, notice how carefully Ryder has maintained this rhythm and the rhyme scheme, the poetry of the lines, and how very carefully, just like the human and the non-human interact, the poetry and the prose also interact. And we'll look at this a little more carefully, why this is required. Why does one alternate between prose and rhyme? Right. When Garuda is your king, what is this fellow good for? So he says, a single king of lordly sway is good, but more than one will slay, like plural sons on judgment day. So obviously, if you have too many sons, they will cut you into pieces. When you are dying, you should really have one son on whom the property would be bestowed, and one king. And therefore, you need a king who will be feared, who will be well known to all, and his name should be a very emblem of security. And this is where the first tale comes in, right? So this is the story narrated by the crow to the birds, within a story narrated by Livestrong to the crows, right? Can you see the structure? Why I'm talking about a Chinese box or a Russian doll? There's a story within a story. Every story has its own narrator. So if you make that chart, which I told you to make, then you immediately find out how many stories are there, who tells these stories, and therefore who are the most important characters and what are the most important themes. So the first story is about the hare and the elephants. And the theme of this story is that a powerful king, the name of a powerful king, is a deterrent. Also, the theme remains that through intelligence, even the most ferocious and humongous of beasts can be persuaded. So the running theme of Kakolukiyam is intelligence, shrewdness, cunning, through which a more powerful enemy, adversary may be controlled or defeated. In this case, it is the importance of the name of the king, the power of the king as a deterrent, and the intelligence of the hare. Therefore, the rabbit fooling the elephant, and that there's all the water bodies die out, and the elephants come to a pool where there's a lot of hares who are then crushed to death. So obviously, they have to survive. They have to persuade the elephants not to come to that particular lake. So these fellows curse their tracks, will come here every day, and let some plan be framed at once. And thereupon a rabbit named Victory says, I promise it, from my guardian angel has granted me this grace. And the rabbit king is extremely perturbed. He says, speak for pleasure, speak with measure, speak with grammar's richest treasure, not too much and with reflection, deeds will follow words' direction. So the moral that here is being delivered is that speak only what you can achieve. Do not speak in haste, right? And he says, he says, speak what lies in your commission, speak with careful composition, grammar and good ethics seeking. It is as if myself were speaking. So the rabbit is an envoy, as it were. So how does the envoy, Dutark, how does the envoy deliver a message? What is the conduct of the envoy? Now, can you understand how Panchatantra is evolving, not only as a text that talks about the behavior of the king and the counselor, of course, but also how the proper envoy should go. Thus, this is in brief the envoy's care, an argument to fit the facts, and sound results so far as speech may be translated into acts. And then he goes to the elephant king, and Victory also says you should not go very close to a powerful foe. So an elephant will kill you if he touch, a serpent if he sniff. So once again, this is practical knowledge for all, that you do not go close to a serpent, because if he can sort of bite you, you will die. King's laughter has a deadly sting, so you should not joke with a king, because proximity to the king can lead to a lot of danger. And a rascal kills by honoring. So a rascal is somebody who is unscrupulous, who is যেটাকে আমরা বাংলায় বলবো বেঈমান, who betrays, and he betrays by honoring you. He first honors you and then kills you, right? Therefore, from a distance he talks to the elephant and he says that I have come from a great king, and this king is, of course, with his intelligence, he composes the king as the moon king, right? So and then he talks about statecraft again, that no injury may be done to an envoy in the discharge of his function. তোমরা তো পড়েছো, দূত অবদ্ধ, right? So that is what Panchatantra is actually sort of telling us, that is what the Panchatantra is doing. It is creating or giving us statecraft, political science, through narratives, through exemplars. এগুলোকে বলা হয় এক্সেম্পলার, EXEMPLAR, আরো সহজ কথায় যদি বলো examples. So short narratives, firing our imagination, holding our attention, and then the moral is delivered, hammered in with the verse at the end. Right? Therefore, by command of the moon, all those who madly march to deeds, not reckoning who are masters, themselves are powerful enemies, are asking for disasters. Once again, so look before you leap. Take your actions or make your actions with discernment. And this, the elephant king felt his heart stagger. It is true, sir, I have sinned against the blessed moon. So he travels to seek the uh, moon's sort of forgiveness. And the rabbit, of course, leads him to the image of the moon on the lake. And the elephant is so overcome that it touches the water and it ripples and he sees 1,000 moons. So this is a crisis because the rabbit has just shown the moon to be a hole. And as soon as the elephant has touched the water, obviously that illusion has cracked. And this is a new crisis. But immediately, what the rabbit does is, with shrewdness, transforms the crisis into an opportunity. Oh, to king, you have doubly enraged the moon because you've touched this water. My worthy sir, in all other manners, beseech me the forgiveness. I shall never return here. And therefore, he goes back to this thesis of his, Livestrong, the crow, that with a great king, you will not require, or with the reputation of a great king, the greater your king, the greater his reputation, and therefore you will be inviolate from foes. So why choose the owl as the king who can do nothing? You already have Garuda, who has this impregnable great reputation. And then he says, the owl is a seedy rascal with a wicked soul. He could never protect subjects. Right? So he's mean, he's violent, and he will offer only death rather than protection. Do not choose a seedy umpire. Do not choose a dubious mediator. Dubious is Dubious. Do not choose a dubious mediator. And therefore, he immediately launches into the other tale, is the tale of the rabbit and the partridge. So once again, write it down in your chart. Rabbit and partridge. What is the theme? That if you are foolish enough to choose a dubious mediator, a seedy umpire, then you will be destroyed. Choose as a mediator someone who has no stakes. And what is the story? The story is about the cat, the partridge, and the hare. And the moral of the story, as I've told you, is to choose your mediator correctly. Who is telling this? The crow to the owls. Right. So the cat's judgment, and the story is about the partridge and the cat. The partridge and the hare, and how the partridge takes up, goes away from away from his home in search of greater food, and the hare comes in and stays there for quite some time. The rabbit named Speedy, or rabbit or whatever, hare. So it says the partridge wants to come back to his home. So there's this idea of home sweet home, and the home as the place to where one wants to return always, despite the riches that he may have. No mortal has such joy, although in heaven's fields he roam, as in his city, in his land, and in his humble home. Now, that is not part of statecraft. That is not part of the story, really. That is the story of every man, as it were, of every society, that despite your roamings around, you are best suited at your home. Now, once again, I would like to trigger off a question to you. You don't have to answer this right now. But what is home? Like, is home four walls? Is home where you belong? What happens to people who therefore are uprooted from home? Who are uprooted from home? Say, for example, think about the partition. Think about a lot of you who have your villages where you are rooted. Think about the people who never had a home for themselves. Where is your home? Is it where you spent your childhood? What happens to people who move from place to place? Look up the two words called refugee and diaspora, right? Just for your curiosities, because these are going to come in as themes in your later paper. So maybe you could take this time off and take a look at these two words, refugee. Who is a refugee? What is a border? And what is a diaspora? Come back with the response. Maybe next class, if you remind me sometime after the class is over, then we can have a small discussion on what these three terms mean. I'm just trying to give you an idea of what or how your syllabus will sort of move, branch out into different concepts over the next few years. But then let me come back to my text, otherwise I'll never be able to finish. So he says, rabbit, come on, this is my house, leave it. And the rabbit says that, there's a legal position that, for 7 years, if you have vacated your home, it belongs to someone else. And who will mediate that? Therefore, there's a neighbor who will mediate. So for ownership, subsistence, tanks, wells, groves, and houses too, the neighbor's testimony goes, such is the legal view. So you are also glimpsing not only into the statecraft of the period, but you're also glimpsing into how the legal system of the time operated, how important the neighbor's opinions became. So neighbor's testimony is decisive of the suit. But once again, the title to possession is a 10 years habitation. So Panchatantra is bringing within the ambit of the story complex issues about not only policy decisions of the state and kingship, but also legal precedents of the time, right? So therefore, we will consult the specialist. They go to a specialist, and they say that there's a tomcat whose name is Scourdier. He abides unshaken in his vow of penance and self-denial. Now, you will obviously, most of you realize that from this story has come a certain phrase in Bangla, which is called Beral Taposhi, right? Biral Taposhi or Beral Taposhi. Somebody who poses to be a saint, but who is actually not. Now, there's also a degree of satire in Panchatantra, a satire against human hypocrisy. And very often there's a degree of satire against religious hypocrisy, right? Because you see, sages, priests, Brahmins were considered to be as it were, the privileged classes during the period. But there's also very often a degree of very harsh satire about their greed, their avarice, and their hypocrisy. So the Panchatantra combines advice with satire as well. So there's social satire, there's legal precedent, there's political argument. The Panchatantra becomes, therefore, within the guise of the beast fable, a microcosm of contemporary Indian society. Right. So the rabbit says the soul staggered with terror, and the rabbit is very correct in saying, "Oh, never trust a rogue for all his Pharisaic puzzling." So although he can, pretend to be a pharaoh, as it were, a king and a mendicant, at holy shrines, some saints are found quite capable of guzzling. So not all saints sort of renounce. Some saints also consume, right? And then, of course, the cat has this habit of dissembling, of acting, as it were, of pretending, right? So one must always be beware of the pretender, as it were. And then he gives philosophy: each transitory day of man to moral living give. suck air but do not live. And then he sort of talks about his steadfastness to moral earnestness. Let us ask him. But the partridge says, after all, he's our natural enemy. Let him ask from a distance. So you see, common sense is not unavailable to animals at large, but they're often fooled by shrewdness and cunning. Right? And you will also find out that, you see, the world of the Panchatantra is a very violent world. In a certain sense, the devouring, killing, etc. In spite of the humor of the Panchatantra, if you look very carefully at it, it's a world where there's a lot of killing, there's a lot of cruelty, there's a lot of simulation, and there's a lot of hypocrisy. So it's not a very pretty world, despite its apparent comic, humorous element of innocuous, or it's very apparently very casual narrative. But the world of the Panchatantra, in spite of its casualness, in spite of its innocuous world of animals, is a world of raw violence. I'd like to also remind you of another form which cloaks this violence very well, and something which many of you have been brought up on, and that is the cartoon. Right? If you look at this series called Tom and Jerry, which many of you have, and I'm sure all of you have, not many of you. It's also about the cat and the mouse, the animal and the human world and the interfaces. But if you look at Tom and Jerry as a text, and think about the degree of violence which you really enjoyed, now, would you really want to expose a child to such? You see, sort of Tom sort of bangs the pan on Jerry's head, and Jerry is flattened, as it were. These are ways, subtle ways in which, in many ways, violence enters our consciousness from a very early age and becomes an acceptable part of human discourse. Right? So notice these very subtle things that are gradually grafted into the Panchatantra. The Panchatantra, despite its concept of the nitis and the purusharthas and the different themes, the world of the Panchatantra is a dog-eat-dog world. It's nature read in tooth and claw, as it were, and therefore also the human world. Anyways, I'll not linger on that again. And then there's this idea that he keeps on. There are certain passages in the Panchatantra which linger on, and you see, there's a purpose here. Now, some truths are told by really wise men, but when this cat who poses to be a monk utters words of benediction and wisdom, those words are hollow and hypocritical. So when you take knowledge, even you have to also understand who is giving you this, right? So from the it's not only, rather, let me put it this way, it's not only the knowledge that is important, it is also the context and the giver of that knowledge which is important. He says, who wrongs a sheep slays kinsmen 5, who wrongs a cow slays 10, 100 die for maidens wronged, and 1,000 die for men. So the cat obviously says that violence against animals, violence against women, and violence against men is reprehensible. But then, as soon as he gets the chance, he grabs the animals and eats them. The seedy rogue won their trust. Then, of course, he sees them simultaneously. And therefore, that is why I say a seedy umpire is not very palatable, and the rest of it. Right. So then he comes back to the tale once again and says, why take this crow, who's a very seedy individual, as your king? and the birds all fly away. And the owl, who cannot see, stays there alone with his consort, and his consort tells him that the birds have all gone, excepting the crow. And the owl then warns the crow, "You monster, why have you wronged me by preventing my regal anointing? From this day there is enmity between us." And then comes a very important lesson that the Panchatantra gives us. It says that wounds heal, right? But from cruel, ugly speech you feel a wound that time will never heal. Now that is very important, a lesson for everybody. You see, in our casual life, very often we make comments that hurt. For that small period, it might mean a very small victory. But words have power, right? Those of you who have studied your Harry Potter will remember Dumbledore giving the same lesson to Harry, that words matter, words can heal, just as memories matter and memories can heal. Therefore, words can heal and words can hurt, right? And therefore, from cruel, ugly speech you feel a wound that time will never heal. And there's another important lesson that the crow learns. He says, "I have burdened myself with a needless enmity by speaking so. I should have remembered all spoken words, if harsh and heedless, and inappropriate and needless, are self-condemnatory slips that turn to poison on the lips." And with cruel speech, you get needless enemies, and needless enemies are best avoided. Those of you who have studied Sanskrit will remember the kind of statement that is made, "Shatang bada ma likho." You can speak 1,000 words, but don't write anything, right? But the crow here says that you should not pick up a needless enmity with needless words, because words can hurt. Reflect with many a chosen friend, reflect alone unto the end, then act, then you are intelligent and fame's and wealth's recipient. And therefore, this sequence of the narrative comes to an end. So now Livestrong has explained to Cloudy how, you see, the enmity between the crows and the owls developed. And then comes this, once again, we return to the main frame of the narrative. What is to be done then? And Cloudy asks Livestrong, "What is to be done then?" And he says, "There's effective procedure other than the 6 expedients. And this I will adopt and will myself lead the way to conquer the enemy." So the strategy that he now tells of is of deception. And then comes another tale. So this is the tale told by Livestrong to Cloudy. And this is a story about the Brahmin and the goat, and how 3 rascals actually fooled the Brahmin of the goat. Now, notice that the theme of the story is once again shrewdness, and how through shrewdness one can deceive the enemy and protect oneself. So the Brahmin and the goat, and there's the story about the Brahmin getting a goat for sacrifice, carrying it on his shoulder, and the 3 people who want to rob him of the goat, who are hungry, and therefore who tell him that it's a dead calf, or it's an ass, and therefore or a dog, and therefore the Brahmin is for the first man is not fooled, but when you're recurrently told something, you consider that to be a truth. This was a thesis which was advocated by Goebbels, incidentally. Goebbels, who was part of Hitler's, propaganda machine. Now, a propaganda machine will always tell you that if you bombard you with, a certain message time and time and time again, this is called a pattern of reinforcement, then that becomes somewhere etched in your mind. That becomes truth. So a lie often repeated becomes a truth, is what Goebbels believed in. And this is what actually happens, that the Brahmin is told that he's carrying a dead animal on his shoulders, and finally he believes, throws it, and runs away. right? And so the Brahmin concluded it was a goblin quadruped form, threw it on the ground, and made for home terrified. Also, importantly, note that this is where, you know, the human and uh, this is a tale purely about the human world. It's no longer about the animal world. This is a tale purely about the human world and how human beings can deceive human beings. So, as I said, that the animal world is purely a gateway into understanding the human world. And also see that Indian society at this point of time is rife with superstition and the belief in demons and supernatural events. So the Brahmin can very easily conclude that it is a bhoot or a pishach that he's carrying on his shoulder, and therefore throws it and runs away. So the strong, deft, clever rascals note, and there is sound sense in this. Is any man uncheated by new servants' diligence, praise of guests, maidens' tears, and roguish eloquence? So you can always flatter a man. A woman can always convince a man through through her tears, and new servants through diligence, only to rob him. Right? But one should avoid quarrel with a crowd, though the individuals be weak. So then he tells the story, another insect story of the snakes and the ants. And the powerful snake is defeated by the ants because there's a gash when he wants to go out of his hole. And the ants, although very tiny and very puny, can bite him to death. Right? So the snake and the ants. Now, notice one thing, that there are some stories which are longer in the Panchatantra. For example, the first story told in Mitralabha, Mitrabheda, is the longest story of the Panchatantra. Right? It's quite significantly long. But there are also certain very short tales. For example, this one, where the ants, the snake has a gash, and the ants start biting him and enlarge the numerous wounds, and haughty is the snake perished. So beware the populace enraged. So, king, I have something to tell you which you must consider and ponder and do. And therefore he strategizes. How can this deception be carried out? So you peck me, and he suggests, I have discovered a fifth device, different from the well-known four: conciliation, intrigue, bribery, and fighting. Right? So this is simulation. Simulation is creating an artificial situation, an illusion that the enemy will believe, and therefore there must be a mole, somebody who must infiltrate, go behind the enemy lines, and make the enemy weaker. So you depart from the antelope mountain, you leave me wounded, so that I can penetrate the enemy's fortress. Right? And he says that I suspect that the fortress has only one egress, way of exit. Right? And here you see what the Panchatantra is also doing is talking about the structure of a particular fortification. So how good is a fort? A fort is good only and only if it has multiple exits, multiple secret exits. Otherwise, you have this ability to block it and then create this blockage so that the enemy starves to death. You'll remember in many cases, fortresses were blocked in this way by the Mughals even later on. So this was popular military strategy. So the Panchatantra is not only talking about military strategy, it is also talking about potential fortifications and structures of the fort. Right? So fort must have egress. Say the specialists a gap. If this be lacking, it is not a fortress, but a trap. So a fortress with one exit is just a trap. It's not a fort. So, and then comes this question as to how courtiers and servants are dispensable. You see, once again, this is a structure where the king has all power, and the king feeds his servants, but can dispense with them as the state requires. So understand this very carefully, that the body of the king is equivalent to the body of the state. And therefore, the body of the king is to be protected at all levels. You see, in a monarchy, the king is not just a person, he is also embodying within his body the existence of the state. Therefore, if necessary, the king will have the power to sacrifice the pawns, as it were. So you can see this kind of a chessboard, where to protect the king in chess, for those of you who play chess, very often the pawn can be sacrificed, right? So I take upon myself the chastisement of this traitorous scoundrel, and he pounced upon him, pecked him, and smeared him with blood, and flies away. And then the owl's consort watches it, reports it to the king, and Strong attacks immediately, thinking that in flight the crows are all less powerful. And then he's about to go back when he finds the crow's nest empty. And then Livestrong says, I must not allow this, because if I do, then all my effort will be in vain. I must gain their confidence. The first or second evidence of genuine intelligence is leave a business unbegun, or if begun, see it done. So that is the wisdom that comes forth here, that you've begun something, if you have devised a plan, you must take it to its logical conclusion, right? So I will reveal myself by letting me call. So he talks to them. He introduces himself to the Livestrong. To Strong, and he says, "I am Cloudy's minister," and he says, "The king has rebuked me, thrown me for dead, and you should seek." And I had advocated peace, but he has completely pecked me and left me for dead. So I will conduct you to his abode and cause the total destruction of the crows. So this is where he's trying to penetrate the enemy lines. Now, once the tale of Cloudy and Livestrong, this part was the tale of Cloudy and Livestrong. And as you can see, all the stories were told by the wiser Livestrong, the voice of wisdom, sanity. Now comes the stories of the Owl group and the Owl King and his counselors. Now, these will be stories, of course, of Fro Crusher, which we will talk about in our next class. Who are his counselors and what advice do they give them through their respective stories? So the narrative has followed a certain trajectory. First narrative, Vishnu Sharma to his students. Second narrative of the crows and the owls. Third narrative of the enmity between the crows and the crows and the owls. Fourth narrative of what the crow says to the birds, and again comes back to Livestrong to the king. Now starts a different set of narratives altogether, which are told by the owl counselors to the owl kings. And therefore, once again, there are two kings, two sets of counselors, and two sets of choices that the kings make. What are these choices that the Owl King will make is what we'll find out when we read the remaining tales of the Panchatantra. Right, but that's for tomorrow. Till then, well, I will stop this recording for now, and we will pick up the thread in our next class. Stopping the recording.